By the way, I have to videotape this for school, so in case you're wondering what I'm doing. Just so you know. Nope. Nope. Is that nice or bad?
That's bad.
It's bad? Okay.
Probably all fall asleep.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Caroline, and I'm a nurse here, a fellow radiology nurse with all of you. But I work night shift right now, so you probably haven't seen me much. And I don't really know all of you that well. I've seen you all in passing, but before we get started, if you could just tell me your name and like a little bit about you, like maybe what school you went to or where you worked before here, and how long you've been here, and then we'll kind of get started. I guess I'll just pick on you first. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Debbie Wallace, and I went to Watts School of Nursing. Before that, I worked at Verizon for many years.
Wow.
This is my second career.
Okay. Cool.
And I started in October.
October. Okay.
Neoma. I went to Duke, and this is my first career, and I've been here since August.
Okay.
Yep.
Good deal.
Cool. Brittany, just moved here from Canada. I went to the University of Regina in Saskatchewan, so super far away.
Awesome.
And then before this, I worked a little bit at a rehab clinic with chronically ventilated patients. So
Wow.
I've only been here since October. So.
Okay.
And then I'm Riley. I went to UNC. I actually had my interview the day after the National Championship.
Nice. I remember that day.
Yeah. And then I started here the day of the Solar Eclipse. So November.
What day was that? I don't even remember.
August 21st.
August.
That's right.
I've been here since August.
Nice.
I worked in PQ at UNC, and before that, People Romero up here. And I also like on Ponce Beach.
Nice. That's cool.
I'm Abby. I went to UNC. Started in September. And before this, I stayed home with my kids.
Very cool.
Well, I'm Sharon. I've been here since July. Before this, I was an LP and I worked in mental health.
How do I spell your name?
Huh?
What was you said? I'm remembering your first name wrong.
Sharon.
Sharon.
Mhm.
Awesome. Okay. So how many of you had worked in a radiology-ish setting of any kind before you came here? And I know that probably a lot of you were like, what do radiology nurses do? I'm not really sure. I did that too, by the way. And also, I remember feeling a little bit apprehensive about this setting because I was like, oh, it's kind of hazardous. But I came in, interviewed and shadowed, and I was like, okay, this looks pretty cool. But did anyone feel apprehensive at all before they came because of the hazards that you might, especially as like young women? Did anyone feel a little nervous? Did any family members feel a little nervous for you? Did anybody say anything to you?
Surprisingly, no.
No? Okay.
No.
Well, I was a little apprehensive just because we weren't taught anything about
Right.
it. Like, so, like, going in, like, I just had 0.
Right.
Yeah, so,
It-
like, that's, like, safety for yourself.
Uh-huh. Yeah, like maybe you were told not to do X, Y, Z, but maybe not Y.
Yeah.
And you think of it like this big hazardous thing, and then you're like, okay, well, just go to work now, bye. And you're like, wait, isn't it dangerous? Shouldn't we know more about that? It's actually pretty safe, and just knowing what not to do is enough to keep you safe, but I think it's better to know why. So that's kind of what we're doing here. So that's where we work. So there are a couple of unique safety challenges to our setting. Obviously radiation. MRI, which we know is a strong magnetic field. I guess we know now at least. We have some pretty unique ergonomic hazards. We use weird PPE. We use lead aprons that hang off the front of us, which is awkward. Obviously, we do our fair share of lifting and sliding patients from stretchers and beds and stuff like that to tables, to CT or MRI tables. And we have to do patient care in the presence of radiation sources, which is really awkward, especially in like a critical care situation where you really need to be able to get on top of the patient, or whatever, not on top of them, but lean over them, bag them, do something with their EKG leads. But instead, you find yourself kind of doing this, trying to do this, and you find yourself in awkward positions all the time, especially in fluoro and interventional. That was something that bothered me. when I first, I mean, it still bothers me, but it's just something I noticed when I first started working here. Because I've never had to provide patient care in the presence of some unseen like danger before. Oops. What did I just do? Okay, good. And then we have some biohazards. We do have access to the surgical scrubs because we do sterile procedures, and you know, they're doing they're doing abscess drains and wound vacs, and they're doing all sorts of things like that. So we could get splatter. We don't really stay that close, so it's not really that big of a deal, but in theory we are exposed to that stuff. So much so that we do have surgical scrubs available to us, like we do sterile procedures. So there's splashes, there's needle sticks, there's things that we could get involved in that we don't necessarily see that often in other areas. And we're doing a lot of IV medication preparation in a hurry, so there's a lot of needle stick injuries that can happen because of that too. Does anybody, well, I was gonna ask you if you know what radiation is, but the answer is right here. So I honestly didn't really know. Like, I knew it was some invisible bad force, but what it is actually energy being emitted from a source. There are two types of radiation. There's electromagnetic radiation, which is waves of light actually. And then there's subatomic particles like protons, neutrons, and electrons. And that is I guess a consequence of radioactive decay. So we pretty much just work with electromagnetic radiation. We don't really work with protons, neutrons, or electrons, or the subatomic particles. Here, a little bit, and we'll go into that, but as far as your jobs, mostly what you're looking into is going to be the electromagnetic waves. So I'm just going to go over really briefly particulate radiation, which is the not electromagnetic waves kind. This gets emitted by the Earth all the time in low doses. Oil rocks, generators, smoke detectors, space probes, pacemakers, their mercury or their lithium batteries, cancer treatments. Sometimes we do radioactive seed implants or brachytherapy. We don't do that here, but in nuclear medicine, sometimes they do stuff like that, and on the inpatient oncology floors, they do things like that too, where people will have an implant and you have to stay away from their room, and pregnant women can't go in there and things like that. You have to minimize your time with one-on-one patient care. Nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons are also this kind of radiation. So there's that. So electromagnetic radiation is photons. That's what rays of lights are. Is they're photons. There's visible and invisible light. So there's radio, there's microwave, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet light, and there's sunshine, which is a type of ultraviolet. There's X-rays, which is what we use in CT and X-ray. CT is just like a lot more X-rays, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But X-ray is like one singular beam, and CT is like a million little 365-degree beams of X-rays, which are really all just light. But we'll talk about why it can be harmful in a little bit. And there's gamma rays, which is what they facilitate in nuclear medicine a lot of times. And there's terrestrial lighting, like lightning. So what makes radiation hazardous is when it's ionizing. So what ionizing radiation does is it displaces or alters the electrons orbiting exposed atoms and molecules, for example, your skin or your organs. The actual DNA is really vulnerable to this. So previously neutral atoms or molecules get electrically charged or ionized. I'm sure we've all been in this class recently, unfortunately, when you remember how that works. Makes them unstable. Their functional and structural integrity is impaired. So that's where you get mutagenesis and carcinogenesis. So the thing about electromagnetic waves, they're high energy, they're low mass, but they're highly penetrating because of that. So when they run into your molecules, they don't really slow down very easily like a particulate radiation, where all you need to protect yourself from particulate radiation would be like a thin layer, like a shirt. Whereas for photons, they're so penetrating, you need like a wall of lead or a lead vest to protect you from those things because they're so high energy and highly penetrating. Their ability to ionize is less than particulate radiation. However, they're able to penetrate. So that's where their danger really comes in. Is when you get exposed over and over again, that it can actually cause some damage. However, you don't really have to worry because your exposure is so low, and we'll go over that soon, like the national exposure limits, and then like Duke's exposure limits, which are substantially lower. So they really do a good job making sure we're not getting exposed to that much more than a regular person. So this is kind of cool. I thought this was neat. This is like the electromagnetic spectrum, and it shows you the frequency. It's the frequency of the waves of electromagnetic radiation that make them ionizing or not, because it represents the high energy. So you've got like radio, you've got like your TVs, your remote controls, your night vision goggles. You got your visible light here, and then this is where it starts to be ionizing here, ultraviolet light, and then you have like airport security scanner, terrestrial PET scanners, CT scanners. It gets a lot more high frequency. And so that's when you actually start, there's enough energy in those massless photons to actually start knocking your electrons around and giving you unstable, damaging your DNA. This is just an example of what it would take to shield the different types of radiation. You can see alpha particles. It would just take like a piece of paper or a shirt. Beta particles would be like a foot away, or maybe like, a piece of wood or something in the way. And then you get to the gamma and the X-ray, which is what we work with most of the time, where you'd want some lead to protect you from the highly penetrating photons, something really dense like that. So our occupational sources, as you know, are CT, fluoroscopy. There's a little bit of PET. There's some CT and nuc med. They also use metastable radionuclides, which is like their technetium and their the things that they inject for people getting full body PET scans. And then they use their gamma cams to pick up on the gamma rays, which are being emitted from gamma rays are they're a little bit less penetrating than X-rays and photons, but the gamma rays are emitted in such small doses that it really doesn't harm anybody, like when they come inject your patient with technetium or something like that. I mean, I wouldn't want to spill it all over my arm, but it's okay. So yeah, these are the things that they use there, but usually they use technetium when they come inject your patient with that stuff, but you can see they keep it in a lead box and they're pretty safe with it. And I'm not going to talk any more about particulate radiation because we just don't use it that much. It's just good to know that there's different kinds, basically. Does anyone have any questions so far? I know it's kind of dense. Okay, if anyone has any questions at any point, you can just raise your hand or just say something. It's very informal. So shielding yourself from the kind of radiation that we encounter on a daily basis, the pearls of that is distance, shielding, time, and dose. So the farther away you can be from the source, the better, obviously. You should always be wearing something to shield your body in the room. Minimize your time in the room, and obviously the dose part you can't really control because that's the protocol, basically. So like a PE study versus a CAP, the radiation dose is going to be a lot higher depending on the level of detail that they need on the scan. So PPE, we have lead glass goggles that no one wears because they look silly.
Where are they, by the way?
So they should be by on the technologist desk.
Okay.
Like they kind of just sit there around the desk. And I use them when I go in for like a heart study, and I have to be in the room during right up on the patient, which I kind of hate doing, but it's something that we do sometimes. So if you wear your goggles and your vest, and you're fine. Thyroid guards. Those are often worn. I find that they're often worn incorrectly because they're cumbersome and they're hard to secure around your neck. The standard for the lead vest is actually 0.25 millimeters, but ours are 0.5, which is great. And they're inspected at least annually per the Radiation Safety Division, and they can come by anytime. If you have personal lead that you're storing here, it's also subject to being inspected. So just because it's yours doesn't mean that they're not going to look at it. The only person I think that has their own lead here is Andy, if I'm not mistaken, in our part of the department. As you know, don't turn around, sit down, or bend over in the presence of X-rays. I'll show you why, which hopefully you guys already know, but I've noticed that sometimes people, when they're doing, I hope this can see me.